Right, good evening. Hope you're all well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Basra Daf Zayin. We're starting 2 lines from the bottom on Vav Amud Beis. We have a lot of ground to cover going to the top of Ches Amud Aleph. Not a very difficult Gemara, but it is still a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. We're going to learn a number of halachos under the name of Reb Chama, and then we'll see if we paskin like him in all of these cases. Let us jump in. Hahu Betrei Havu Daire. There were 2 people living in the same location. Chad Havadair Eloi, Chad Havadair Tatoi. One lived in the upstairs and one lived in the downstairs. And Ispar Tatoi, the lower floor broke, literally broke, but it actually means that it sunk a little bit. So getting into the house was a little difficult. The door frame was 6 feet, but the roof of it sunk in. It was very hard to get into the apartment. Crazy. Says the real estate man. These things happen, not so much where we live. Yeah, not like that. So Amarle Tatoi Le'iloi, the guy living downstairs said to the guy living upstairs, bro, this is not working. Ta v'nivne, let's rebuild. Amarle, the guy upstairs says, you know what? I'm really doing fine. Ana shapir kadei diarna. I'm really okay. Thanks for asking. I'm okay. Amarle, don't worry. Istere anova avne. I'll destroy it and I'll rebuild it. But it's all on me. You have nothing to worry about. I'll cover everything. Top of Zayin Medal. Amarle, lesi duchta lemedabra. I have nowhere to live in the interim. Amarle, don't worry. Ana ogir lach duchta. I'll rent you a place. Amarle lo terachna. He says, I don't want the headache. You have to live in your sinking apartment. I'm not going anywhere. So says the Gemara, lo kamistarli. This is not a place where I can live. That's what the guy in the Tatoi said, the bottom guy. The guy on the upstairs said, Shuf akreisach ve'ol, go onto your stomach and crawl in. V'shuf akreisach upok, and go onto your stomach and crawl out. This is not my problem. You just got to fix it up. So what's the halacha? It's 5 lines down, 5 lines down. Amar Rav Chama, bedina kama akev. Technically speaking, the person who is on the upper floor is able to be me'akev, which is very surprising. But that is the din. Provided that the beams of the house have not gone down low enough that they are into the 10 tfachim closer to the ground. But once they do get that low, then matzi amarle you cannot hold me out from fixing my apartment in that case. And not only that, when that happens, the guy upstairs has to pay. He actually has to help in the process. Very surprising halacha.
Either one is going to wind up being affected by what happens to the other.
Guy upstairs is happy.
But if the downstairs is falling apart, he's going to fall down too.
Until it happens, that's why he probably has to pay in lumdus, because it does negatively affect him in the future. But the Maisa, Rav Chama says that as long as it's not within 10 tefachim, that's 40 inches. You have to crawl on your floor. That's the din. That's an unbelievable thing. That's just very surprising. Very surprising. And that's only if they didn't get into conversations and negotiate prior to that. But if they do have a conversation, and then they agree, listen, I know we're moving in, and I know the din of Rav Chama that you could really withhold me if my floor begins to sink in or if my ceiling begins to sink in. I know. But let's make a deal out of the gates that if that happens, even a little bit, we're rebuilding. And if the guy upstairs says no problem, then sasre uvanu, then they would take down the building and rebuild it. 10 lines down, Zayin Badal. Says the Gemara, when they do agree, what is this new agreement? So the Gemara says, and we're not going to get into the details of this now, but Amru Rabbanan Kame de Rabba, Mishmei de Marzotra Bred Rav Nachman. Amr Mishmei de Rav Nachman. This is like something that we'll see a little bit later on in the Masechta. Rumo, the height should be kechatzi orka u kechatzi rachbo, like half of the length and half of the width. In other words, there's a formula of sorts that determines the height that is a meaningful height. We're not going to get into this now. But that's what the Gemara says. Amar lehu Rabba says to everyone, La'ava mina lehu, didn't I tell you, lo tislu bei boki sriki b'Rav Nachman? Don't hang empty bottles on Rav Nachman. Fascinating phrase. Don't misattribute things in the name of Rav Nachman. What you just said is not a Rav Nachman dekadin. Why not? Because Hachi Amar Rav Nachman. Ki de daire inshi. It should be like regular people live. What do you think he's going to make you crawl in the apartment? That's ridiculous. Rav Nachman would never say such a thing. And therefore, Ladina, we can force the guy upstairs to do construction even earlier in the process. Vikama, what is considered to be the threshold in halacha, where we would say that the upper guy has to now participate in the construction. Amar Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua ki hechi da'ale isu raisa to mechoza v'hadar, so that you can bring in, as the Gemara explains over here, a bundle of reeds and be able to walk with them in your house. Now, I don't know if this is exactly right, but an open lulav and esrog, if you can walk around and it's not hitting the ceiling, it's not bumping into things, you're good to go. That's considered a place to live. If when you're holding your lulav and esrog, you have to hold it sideways because you can't hold it, that's already, again, I'm not being exacting, but that's something along those lines. That's story number one. And a unique din of Reb Chama, that Reb Chama says that the guy upstairs can be ma'akev. Here is story number two. I built a wall, and I built it in a way where it was blocking some of the windows to your house. You're darkening my house. You're right, I'll block your windows over here. But I'll build you new windows above my wall. If you do that, you're going to be ruining my walls. I don't want you cutting holes in my wall and doing construction. That reduces the integrity of the wall. Every time you poke a hole in a wall, you're reducing the integrity of this. I literally had this today. The hydraulic thing that holds my screen door, I'm trying to screw it in. The wood's integrity was shot from the previous 10 gems. I tried to screw in, they're done. I had to put in another piece of wood. So this guy's saying, I don't want you to do construction on my walls. You're ruining the integrity of my walls. Amarle, don't worry. I'm going to tear down your wall up until the level of the window. So let's say your wall's 10 feet tall. I'm going to cut it down to 4 feet, and then I'll rebuild it. And then I'll cut your wall down to 4 feet, and then I'll rebuild it with new windows. And then the owner of the house says, no, the lower part of the wall is old, and the upper part of the wall is new, and lo kaima. Before Hashem explained, what we're concerned about is that cement that is old and cement that is new doesn't bind well together. That was the concern over here of the old wall and the new wall. Amarle, fine, I'm going to do you one better. I'll take your wall down all the way to the ground. And I'll rebuild your wall. And I'll build windows into the new wall. No cost to you. The guy's like, look, that's a great deal, but I have 4 walls to my house. One of them is from 2024, and one of them is from 1924, and it doesn't look good. That's what the Gemara says. I have one wall that's new and a house that's all old. That's not something I'm willing to tolerate. How about I'll take this way further? I'm going to rebuild your whole house so that I can get the walls that I want. This is already the neighbor. He has too much money. He's got to stop now. That's what he says. I'm going to take down your whole house. And I'll rebuild the windows in a way that works for you and that works for me. I have nowhere to live if you're going to rebuild my house, and I don't want to go anywhere. I'll rent you a place. Don't worry about it. I'm not in the mood for the headache, which makes a lot of sense. So Amar Rav Chama, Bedin Kame'akev, the guy whose window is being blocked by the wall is allowed to say, I'm not interested in doing all of this work. I'm just not into it. Says the Gemara, Hainuhach. This case of me building and blocking your window sounds very similar to the previous case of my house that's shrinking a little bit. Rav Chama is giving the same din, that the guy who is less affected is the one who doesn't have to do anything. He can be ma'akev. Hainuhach, says the Gemara on the last of the short lines, 3/4 of the way down on Zayin Amud Aleph. Hainuhach v'hasulam ali. Why do I need to have 2 cases? Why do I need the case number 1 about the roof that's falling down, and this case about the window that's being blocked? Because a big chiddush, kamash malan, te'af al gav, that the window that you're blocking is the lo mishtalbe shalosh tivna o beit sivi ba'alma, even though the windows that you're blocking are for like a garage that stores hay and that stores pieces of wood, still I as the balabais can be ma'akev, which is fascinating. I don't even live in that building. My parents have a garage in their backyard. If my neighbor built a house and it was blocking the sunlight to the window of the garage, my father can say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to do that. Not allowed. Fascinating. Story number 3, first of the long lines. Hanu Beitrei Achi, 2 brothers, the Palgi Bahade Adadi. They were splitting a Yerusha from their father. Chad Matya Aspelida. One person inherited a piece of property that had a mansion on it. V'chad matya tarbitza. The other one got a large field. And it was like and it's not a really fair breakdown. This guy gets a mansion, the other guy gets a cornfield. It's a little bit uneven. We'll see soon that they actually did even out financially. Anyways, Azal Hahu de Matya Tarbitza, the guy who got the field, he went and Vikabane Ashisa Apuma de Aspalida, and he built a wall on his property, but next to the mansion. Amarle Kame Apela Salai. The wall that you built on your property is shadowing my mansion. Amarle Bididi Kabanina. I built it on my property. Stop crying. No problem at all. Amar Rav Chama bidin ka amarla. That is actually halachically correct, slightly different than the case we just saw before. Amar le Ravina leRavashi ma'ishna mehadatanya. Why is this any different than the following brisa? Shnei achin shechilku, two brothers who were splitting a Yerusha. Echad mehen notal sdei kerem. One person got a vineyard. Ve'echad mehen notal sdei lavan. One of them got a field with white, with regular growth in it, not a vineyard. So the halacha is yeshlo the Bala Kerem. The Bala Kerem who has a vineyard, he has to be given some latitude. What does he get to keep? Dalad amos bistei lavan. So the guy who owns the Kerem is able to get the 4 amos around his property, even though they're in the stay lavan. And the reason that's the case is because he's allowed to use that in order to work his field. Hope everything is okay. Oh, okay. Just making sure we're not.
Not sure.
The little sprachs afterwards.
Is it Mark has his?
I don't know. It's just very close to home over here. So
It is very close.
yeah. So anyways, the Gemara says that if I'm the Bala Kerem in the middle and you're the stay lavan around me, I get 4 amos of your field to work my field. It's for the tractors, for the plows, for the animals, whatever the case may be. Shalmanas kain chilku. Why were we machal? Why'd you give me a stay kerem if I can't service it? It doesn't make sense. A pashut, I need to get the dalad amos. So the Gemara says there should be something that's a little bit similar. Why did you give me why did I get the mansion, but I can't even live in it in the way that I want to? That's what the Gemara is asking. Amar le hasam, by the mansion and the regular field that the two brothers were splitting, that's the alu lahadade. They worked everything out. They evened out the dollars. The piece of property with the mansion was worth $1 million. The piece of property without the mansion was worth $500,000. So the person who had the mansion gave $250,000 in cash. So they each had a property of $750,000. Shaveh b'shaveh. So over there, it makes sense. About hachamai, what would you say over here by the stay kerem and the stay lavan? Delo alu hadade b'chi b'shoftani askina. We're talking about people who are not bright. The high shakil aspelida of high shakil tarbitza v'lo alu hadade. Absolutely not. You're right. They did actually discuss things, but that was only in regards to Dmei Livnek Shuri V'Hudre. That's actually in regards to actual cost of property. But Dmei Avira, Lo Alu Lahadre. They actually didn't talk about the physical space and about whether or not you're allowed to build a wall. So that's why these cases are a little bit different. That in one case, they had spoken out all the details about the air space around, and in the other case, they did not speak about it. Says the Gemara, maybe one argument could be made, the Me'ikara Ispalida Palgisli. Hashta mashvisli idrona. Initially, we agreed that I would get the mansion, but now you've made it an idrona, which is a very dark space. When you've left my house very dark. Rav Simi Barashi, Shma be'alma palagle. When I gave you the ispalida, I wasn't giving you the rights of the ispalida with all of the trimmings and trappings, just a property called an ispalida. Milo Tanya, and we actually saw this in Bava Metzia. We saw this just recently. Ha'omer beis kur afar ani mocher lach. If I say that I'm selling you a beis kur of afar, which sounds like I'm selling you a volume of afar, it's actually not what's happening. Really, afal pisha eno ela lesech, even if I have a lesech is half of a base core, even if I only have a lesech, higio, the contract is still binding. Shalamachar ela shema. I only sold you the name of the property, namely that the field is called a base core field. Not that it's a field that is a volume of base core, but it's a field that's called base core. It says the Gemara, "Who demiskare base core," and similarly by a pardes, by an orchard, pardes ani mocher lach afal pish ein borimonim. Even if there are no pomegranates in the orchard, higio, the contract is binding. Shalomachar ela shema, because I didn't sell you a pardes with rimonim. The place is called a pardes. That's what it's called. I'm not selling you a specific amount of rimonim, but only v'hu demiskare pardes has to be called that way. And similarly, karamani mocher lach afal pish ein bogefanim. I can sell you a grapevine, even though there are no grapes. I could sell you a vineyard, even though there are no grapes. And higio, that would be a valid contract as well. 3 lines from the bottom. Shalom machar ela shema, shalom machar lo ela shema, v'hudim iskari karma. So what we see over here is that it's possible that when you and I split the property, and you took the larger building, and I took the property, and you took the Ispalida, and I took just the blank field. So there, says the Gemara, maybe it's Ispalida like the title, not Ispalida like a mansion with all of the trappings and trimmings that you get to have all the light you want, and that I can't build a wall. No, maybe I'm allowed to build a wall. Says the Gemara, Midami, these 2 cases are not comparable at all. Hasam, in all of the cases that we just saw about the names, Matzi Amarle, Mochile Lokech, Shmaz Vinilach. There you can say, I'm selling you something that's called this. I'm selling you a base kur. I'm selling you a pardes. I'm selling you a keren. But hacha, in regards to our case of the Ispalida, Matzi Amarle Adaiti Dahachi Palgi. The reason why we split the way we did, that I took the mansion and that you took the field, was did Ir Nabe, that I should be able to live in this property, Ki Hechi Dedaru Abba Hasan, just like our father lived in this property beforehand. So it's not reasonable. You want to tell me Shema? No, this is not a case of Shema where it's called a just called a mansion, and therefore I get it, but without any rights at all, and that you can block all my sunlight. No, I want to live in this place just like it was lived in before by our father. So Amrulay, they said to him, Amrulay Mar Yenuka, turning to the top of Zion in the base, heading to the top of Chesed Aleph, Umar Kshisha Breder of Chizal Rav Ashi. You're absolutely right. There are Tzvei Drachim here. There's 2 different shitas. And Naharda'e, the people from Naharda are Lita'amayu. They have their own shita. Take a look at Rashi for the historical note. Tibur Hamaschel Naharda'e Lita'amayu. Rav Chama Demin Nahardahu. Rav Chama is from Naharda. And Rashi says at the end that Shmuel was also from Naharda. So if you look back, you'll see that all of that makes sense with all the shitas that we saw. That the reason why Rav Chama was makbid the way that he was, to paskin the way that he did, was because of the fact that he's from Naharda. What do the Naharda people hold? The Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Ha'achin shechilku ein lahem lo derech ze al ze, v'lo chalonos ze al ze, v'lo sulamos ze al ze, v'lo amas hamayim ze al ze. If you and I are splitting something, they're totally separate entities. They're totally separate entities. Ad kedei kach, that I can't force you to do anything, like Rav Chama said multiple times. Vizaru behen shehalachos kavuosein, and you should be very careful with this halacha. And right after that sentence, Rava says, I don't care what you just said because I disagree with you. V'Rava Amar yesh lahem. No, they have rights. They can push back. They can say, they have the ability to get what they want done. That brings us to the 2 dots, which is 6 lines down or so on Zayin Amid Beis. Let us continue. Ahushtara di Yasme. There was a document that was used for Yisomim, but unfortunately, even though the item was potentially paid, the document should have been torn up, but it wasn't torn up, and the document surfaced again. The Nafak Alei Tabra, and the receipt, the shover, as we would say in Hebrew, the tuf and shin are interchangeable in Aramaic. The shover, the receipt showed up. That's not normal. The shover should have been put away, should have said paid, it should have been torn up, whatever the case may be, but now we have it. So it's a little bit of an uncommon scenario. So Amar Rav Chama, agvuye lo magvin alain. We can't really collect based on this document because it's really not supposed to exist, but umikra lo karin ale, we also shouldn't tear it up. Why not? Agvuye lo magvin alain denofak tavra ale. It's not uncommon in the case of Yisomim, in any case, to have a paid receipt show up. But mikra lo karin ale, why don't we tear it up? Because the chigad liyasme, when the Yisomim grow up, dilma maisu raya umarile. Maybe they'll be able to collect on it when they're a little bit older, and they'll be able to develop and bring a raya one way or the other. Amarle Rav Acha Berei the Rav Ravina Hilchos Samai. How do we paskin in such a case? In all of these cases, I should say, because we saw this was another Rav Chama case. Rav Chama's shita is right after the 2 dots. He said Agbuye lo magbin anle and umekar lo karin anle. So we saw Rav Chama's shita 4 times. How do we paskin? Amarle, quarter of the way down in Zayin Amid Beis. Bekulu Hilchosa Kirav Chama levar mitabra. We agree with Rav Nachman, with Rav Chama, in all of the cases that we've learned up until now, with the exception of the most recent one, which is this case of the receipt that showed up well after the fact. And that means that if we look back on the previous page, if you live upstairs and I live downstairs and my ceiling is sinking in, until I'm 10 tefachim from the ground, you have no obligation to help me. And similarly with all the other cases that we saw, with the exception of this one. Why is this case different? Because we don't assume that there is a definite lie in this case. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. I disagree with you. The halacha is like Rav Chama, that what? That agbuye lo magbinan umekari Umakari lo karinan. We don't collect, but we don't tear it up. The imisa de tabra ma'al yahu ibayle la'afuke b'chayavun. If it was a good receipt, they should have collected it while the father was still alive. Don't give it over to the asumim. If a person is owed money, that means that there's a reasonable set of dates on it. You should have collected the money already. When we do lo afke, by virtue of the fact that that didn't happen, shmamino ziyufe zayfe. L'chora, there's a risk that it's mezuyaf. It's a risk that it's been forged. And therefore, we hold on to it for the future, but we can't collect from it. That's what the Gemara says.
You cannot collect.
Right. You hold on to it. The only way you can collect is if down the road there's a proof that's brought one way or that's in the favor of the assuming that they can collect from it. That brings us to a new Mishnah, a third of the way down from Zayin Amud Beis. The Mishnah writes, Kofen oso livnos beis sharbedeles lechotzer. Let's say that there's a chotzer, a couple of people are benefiting from the chotzer, so you can obligate other people to build a beis shar and a deles. The beis shar is a little bit of a unique structure. A beis shar is a semicircle of wall that kind of blocks the opening to your house so people can't see in. In O'Hare, they have, not in semicircles, but opposite the men's bathroom, sometimes they have a wall that you have to walk around to get in. You can't see into the bathroom. Similar idea, not for tznius purposes here, because we're not talking about tznius here, we're talking about hezek re'iyah. So here the Gemara says that for a chatzah, you can obligate everyone to pay in to build that semicircle wall, the beis shar, and as well the delis, and of course to make a door. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Omer lo kol hachatzer ze'us lebeis shar. Not every chatzer gets a beis shar. We don't know what this means yet. And we'll see in the Gemara. The next part of the Mishnah reads, Kofen oso livnos le'ir choma udlasai muvriach. We have a din that we're supposed to build a wall for a city, and that we're supposed to build doors, and we're supposed to put up the appropriate bars. Rashba gomer lo kol ha'ayaros ru'uyos lechoma. Depends on the city. Not every city is big enough. As we'll soon see, it depends more on its location than its size. And the Gemara says, Kama yehe be'ir v'yehe ke'anshe ha'ir. How long does a person have to live in a city to the point that he should be obligated in these fees, in covering the beis shar and covering the deles, b'chulei? Yud Beis Chodesh. We'll see soon in a couple of blots some well-known Gemaras about how much time it takes for a person to become a Ben Ir. But that right now, just for the basics, it's 12 months. However, Kanaba Beis Dira, if I lay down the cash to buy something, Harehu Ka'an She'ir Miyad, right away. If you're renting, no. But if you buy, you're instantly a base, you're, what was the language here? You're Anshe Ha'ir. Okay, so it said in the beginning of our Mishnah that if you and I share a chatzar, that I can obligate you to help build this beis shar, that help build this semicircle that kind of blocks the entrance to prevent hezek re'iyah. L'meimra, says the Gemara, it appears therefore that the Mishnah assumes that the beis shar me'al yusahi, that it's a maila to build a beis shar. However, we have a story that strongly conflicts with this. What's that? There was a particular pious individual, and it was normal for him to meet up with Eliyahu Navi, because that's normal. And Avad Beis Shar, this guy, the pious individual who used to meet regularly with Eliyahu Navi, he built a Beis Shar, and Alatar, the second he finished construction, the Sulam Ishtoi Bahadeh. Then he no longer saw Eliyahu Navi anymore. So says the Gemara, what, is a Beis Shar good? Is a Beis Shar not good? So the answer is it depends how you build the Beis Shar. Lo kasha. Ha migavoy, ha mivroi. One is talking about if you build a beis shar inside your door, right? So if you build a beis shar inside your door, that is a limiting factor for poor people to get in. However, if it's ha mivroi, if it's an outside, then the poor person can go in, and then he can just call in and ask for what he wants. But this has to do with poor people. That's answer number one. Answer number two, 6 lines before the wide lines, 2/3 of the way down, Zayin Amud Beis. Really, in both cases, the beis shar is on the outside of the property. Below kasha had islay delas had leslay delas. In one case, there is a wall, there is a door and a beis shar, so that's a double barrier for poor people. That's bad. That's why Eliyahu Navi was upset with the pious individual. And had leslay delas, but in our Mishnah, where it's viewed as a maila, that's when you don't have a door, you only have the beis shar, and therefore it's not a limiting factor for poor people. They're able to gain access to the balabos. And our third answer, the islay deles, there is a door. Below kasha, the islay posachas, the leslay posachas. It depends if there's a lock. If there's a lock, that's a limiting factor for poor people. If not, then not. And lastly, Iboisema, the fourth answer, Havaha de Isle Posachas. It's there is a lock, but Velokasha, ha de Posachas dide migavoy. One's on the inside, ha de Posachas dide mivroy, and one is where it is on the outside. So that's what Rashi says 2/3 of the way down. Rashi says Posachas dide me'avroy. Ha'ani posacha poscha v'nichnas. He's able to still walk in because the lock is done in such a way where he's still able to walk in. What the details are is not clear from the Gemara. That brings us to the two dots at the first of the very long lines. The Gemara says, "Kofen oso livnos beishar v'delas v'chatzer." Let's read a brisa that explains the unique shitas of our Mishnah. Tanya, Rashbag Omer, Lokol Chatzer Sururius Lebeis Shar. That's what we saw in our Mishnah. But this brisa expounds on this idea a little bit further. Ella, when do we say that a field is shaykh to the world of a Beis Shar? That's Chatzer Hasmucha L'Rishus Harabim. That's Ru'ya Lebeis Shar. If the Chatzer is close to a public domain, then you get the Beis Shar. Why? Our concerns are about Hezek Re'iyah. So therefore, we need to have the Beis Shar in order to prevent people from seeing into the field. But if it's far away, it's in the boondocks, it's away from the Rishus Harabim, away from the marketplace, then there is no obligation to build a Beis Shar. The problem is that that's a sheet of the Rashbag, but the Tanna Kama doesn't agree with this. So it asks the Gemara, the Rabbanan, what do they say? Because the Rabbanan seem to require a Beis Shar under all circumstances, not just by Rishus Harabim. So the Gemara says to answer up for the Rabbanan, Zimnin dedach kebin Rishus Harabim va'ailu va'asu. Because when there's a big party and there's a lot of people in the Rishus Harabim, so what ends up happening is they end up spilling over into the quieter parts of the neighborhood. That's why you need to have a Beis Shar, so that when there is an overflow crowd down the side streets and they're coming down to your block, so then you should have a Beis Shar, because otherwise you'll be subject to Hezek Re'iyah. We said Kofen oso livno seir, that you're obligated to build walls. Skip the parentheses. V'rashbag omer lo kol ha'ayaros ru'yas l'choma. Not every city has a chiyuv to build a wall. You can't obligate every resident of every city to build a wall. Ela'ir hasmucha l'sapar. Only cities that are close to the border. Those are the ones that are ru'ya l'choma. But v'she'en hasmucha l'sapar. If your cities are not close to the border, then eino ru'ya l'choma. But again, that's a kasha in the Rabbanan, because that explains the sheet of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel gives a svara that if you're near a border, you need to build a wall to protect yourself. We know what happens when borders are breached. So what do we say about the Rabbanan, who say that even if you're far away from the border, you still need a wall? So Rabbanan, zimnim de mikru v'asi gaisa. Still, it happens that people breach the border and they come with gius, they come with troops and they invade your community. The Gemara asks, Bo'amine Rabbi Lazar me Rabbi Yochanan. Shehen govin, when we are collecting money for these purposes, for the shar, for the money, for the border walls, what is the collection process? Is it lefi nefashos govin? It's a per capita cost. Odilma lefi shvach mamon govin. Or the wealthier the person is, the more money they give, namely a percentage of what you make. Which one is it? Is it a head cost, or is it a percentage payment? It depends on how much money you have. And my son Elazar, you should put nails into this. That was a colloquialism of the day to say, this is definitely the right answer. Don't mess around. This is how we collect money. It is always based on shvach mamon. However, Ika de Amre that Ba'amine Rabbi Lazar me Rabbi Yochanan Shein Govin, Lefi Kiruv Batin Hein Govin, O Dilma Lefi Mamon Hein Govin. Do we say that the people closer to the border have to pay more because they're at greater risk? Or do we say, no, it's just a question of how much money people have? So let's just talk Lamaisa. In the Gaza envelope, people are within walking distance of Gaza. Perhaps they have to build a wall around their community and they have to pay more because they are closer. But the people who live further into Eretz Yisrael would have less of an obligation to pay that money. Which one do we follow? So Amar Le, the Vikiru Batin Hin Govin. So we have a machlokas between the primary Gemara and the Ika de Amre. And here it seems to be that Lefi Kiruv Batin Hein Govin, the closer you are, the more you pay. Same idea, my son, you need to hold on to this halacha, hit some nails into it. Very good. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, which is a well-known fact. We've learned this dozens of times, I believe. And he was Rama Deshura Adarabbanon. He made the rabbis pay these kinds of fees, the protection fees. But it's a little bit weird because people who learn Torah have coverage. That's what the Gemara says over here. Amar Reish Lakish Rabbanan lo tzricha nitirusa. The rabbis don't need any protection at all. I don't know how we define rabbis nowadays. I assume it's people who are learning Yom V'Laila. We're B'nai Torah, and we learn, and that's Givaldic. I just don't know what the thresholds are in halacha. Great sugya, I'm sure, as to when you are begeder nitirusa. Is it only while you're learning? Do you have to learn? Is it Torah umnaso? Do you have to be a dayan? I don't know what the thresholds are. I don't know. I just don't think it's us. So says the Gemara, Reish Lakish says, I don't understand Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Why would you charge the rabbis for the walls? They don't need your protection. Because the pasuk says, and this is a pasuk in Sefer Tehillim, Esperem mechol yirbum. I will count them like the sand, and they will be many. So says the Gemara, Esperem leman. When we say that we're going to count them, what is it that we're counting? If you want to say that righteous people are like the granules of sand, we equate all of the Jewish people with sand. So then tzaddikim atzmam mechol yirbun can't be. You're using the same measure for two different groups, and one is a subset of the other group. You can't tell me that Klal Yisrael is kechol asher al sfas hayam and tzaddikim are kechol asher al sfas hayam. The tzaddikim are a percentage of that larger group. Elamai, it can't be. Elahachi kamar, 4 lines from the bottom. Esperem, when we say that we're counting, what are we counting? We're not counting the righteous people. We're counting lema'aseim shel tzadikim mechol yirbun. The righteous people do tremendously kind, thoughtful things all the time. They do mitzvos. They are shiur. I mean, there's all the things that they do. They're tremendous, and they are kechol asher al sfas hayom. And lokol shekain shemaginin aleim, all the more so that they should have protection. So this is comforting for us that if we do things that are right, we do mitzvos, we're sensitive, we do chesed, we do all the right things, then we have seemingly an extra level of natira. And says the Gemara, v'kal v'chomer umachol shemuat magen al hayam. Just like sand, which is small, can protect us from the water. Right? When there's water on the beach, it goes up, and then the sand allows the water to just go back down, which would not have been the case on cement. So says the Gemara, all the more so if there's activities that are being done by the righteous, they should definitely be protected. So the Gemara doesn't understand Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Why were you charging these people, these Rabbanim Chashuvim, to pay anything? They don't need your help. They don't need Natira, and they should not be held accountable for paying these fees. I have another pasuk that speaks beautifully about Talmidei Chachamim. Of course, we know that Shir Hashirim is all homily, and it sometimes can appear a little bit graphic in its comparisons. The Gemara says, "Ani choma v'shadai kimigdalos." I am a wall, and my chest is like towers. So how do we darshan this pasuk? Ani choma zu Torah. When we say that there's a choma, that there's a wall, that there's a protective measure, that's Torah. V'shadai kimigdalos. When we speak about a woman's chest, what does that mean? Elu talmidei chachamim. And what it means that they're talmidei chachamim is that a Talmud Chacham learns Torah like a baby nurses. That's why the comparison is to breast, to a nursing mother, that a person should be yonek Torah in that way. So says some of the commentaries here. For Reish Lakish Savar Law, we couldn't use this pasuk. And with this drasha, we'll close. Why? Reish Lakish Savar Law kid Darash Rava. Rava had a different pshat in this pasuk of Ani choma v'shadai ki migdalos. What did he say? Ani choma zo Knesset Yisrael. That is where he says that the wall is Knesset Yisrael. V'shadai ki migdalos. What does it mean when we compare to a woman's chest? The Gemara says, "Elu bate knesios bate midrashos." Those are the things that keep us, but it doesn't speak about Talmidei Chachamim. So that's why the Gemara said that we needed the pasuk of Esperem, because we couldn't use the pasuk of Ani choma v'shadai ki migdalos. One thing that doesn't happen in our Gemara is that Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya never responds. He charged the Rabbanim to pay for these things. We said, what are you talking about? They need no Natira. We brought pasuk number 1. The Gemara says, why didn't we bring pasuk number 2? Okay, couldn't bring pasuk number 2. But nevertheless, we have pasuk number 1. And the Chachamim don't need Natira. We'll stop right here on the 3rd line of Chesed Aleph and pick up tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.